It's nice when there's a new album out I'm actually excited to listen to. So normally I don't review music. I usually don't even have much to say about music in my reviews of other media. But there are a few bands that I really like, and I have a fair bit to say about this album. So here we go. Meaningless Reviews, Modest Mouse, The Golden Casket. Most artists I really like are kind of old, their glory days decades in the past, and they aren't producing music anymore. Well, Yes recently announced a new album, and Blue Oyster Cult put out new material last year, but most of the old bands I like have broken up or all died. And on the topic of death, today I'm reviewing The Golden Casket. Modest Mouse is pretty old as well. They were formed 29 years ago, and they are still putting out albums, albeit very slowly. This is only their 7th studio album. While other bands slowed down past their heyday, they have just always been slow. I did not start listening to Modest Mouse until several years after the massive success of Float On, which makes me a fake fan and you shouldn't listen to what I think. I think We Were Dead Before the Ship Even Sank was out too before I even bought any of their albums, with No One's First and You're Next coming out fairly soon after that, and I had their whole back catalog to listen to. I had a lot of Modest Mouse material. I also went to see Modest Mouse live when they came through my city on tour. It's no reflection on the album I'm supposedly reviewing here, but they aren't a very good live band. Most bands add something to songs live, or are at least markedly different from their albums. Modest Mouse did not make an impression live, other than Tiny Cities Made of Ashes being significantly shoutier than their album version. Isaac Brock did play a guitar solo with his teeth, I guess, but there wasn't huge musical improvement and they had very little in the way of stage theatrics besides that. Also, they didn't play Spitting Venom, 0 out of 10 show. My fondest memory of the concert has nothing to do with the music. A person there was wearing a t-shirt that said, "The world is my ashtray," on it. And I thought, oh, that's clever, but also completely expected for a Modest Mouse concert. I wear myself a t-shirt that says, "The world is my ashtray." I don't go to a lot of concerts, but this show was pretty weak compared to the others I had been to around the same time. So let's talk about OAR, Of a Revolution. I saw them live about a year after Modest Mouse, and it was amazing. They bring so much extra life to their songs compared to their album versions. Like, here's an OAR studio track. I'm lucky it wasn't a county cop, 'cause I'm just running out of time. Now here's the live version of the same song. Just running out of my time. 'Cause I'm for game 2. I've never bought any of OAR's music, but would 100% see them live again. Meanwhile, for Modest Mouse, I own pretty much all their albums, even Interstate 8, which was apparently rare until they reissued it. But I have passed on seeing them live again, even though they've returned to my city multiple times. They'll even be here again a couple weeks after writing this, and I'm still not going back to see them again, even though The Golden Casket is pretty good. But I digress. I still need to get to my actual review. So I established I got into Modest Mouse after their commercial success, then they put out No One's First and You're Next, and then Modest Mouse released nothing for 7 years. I went to college and stopped paying attention to them. I'd found other bands to listen to, like Emperor X, who I really should chill more because his music is really good. I don't think I even knew that their next album had come out until I had graduated, and I wasn't missing much. Strangers to Ourselves is a boring, uninteresting album that spent far too long in the oven and had nothing I latched on to. The only interesting new track to me is Wicked Campaign. Well, The Ground Walks Time in a Box is also okay. The only other okay songs were the ones that had already been performing for years. Ansel, Sugarboats, and Lampshades on Fire. I heard Sugarboats at the live show that I went to. Lampshades on Fire is good, but it had already been a single the previous year. The actual new material on the album just didn't click for me. It feels like a jumble of songs with no connection. I'm not saying albums need thematic connection throughout, but most of the tracks sound like album filler, rather than songs that took years to perfect. It's their worst album. So after Strangers to Ourselves, I was not exactly eagerly awaiting their next album. I did not know they had anything new until I heard the debut of We Are Between on the radio driving to work, and thought, this sounds like a Modest Mouse song, but I've never heard it before. At work, I looked up the radio station's play history and found nothing about the song, as it had literally just released and was too new to be listed in their database. So now, let's actually talk about the Golden Casket, starting with the lead single, We Are Between. I had no problems with any audio clips in this review except for We Are Between. So just imagine that's a dramatic reenactment of me hearing it on the radio for the first time in bad quality, instead of distorting the audio so it gets around auto detection. We Are Between. It's no Float On, but this works fairly well as a pop single. The repetition of We Are Between, yeah we are is memorable, partly because of how many times you'll hear it in the song, but it makes up for the lack of really any true musical hooks. My biggest impression of the song still remains, hey, it's a new Modest Mouse song, as it's not very musically distinct from other Modest Mouse songs. But that's not a bad thing, and it seems like a compilation of different Modest Mouse musical hallmarks. And for the first Modest Mouse song I've heard on the radio in a decade besides Float On, it's good enough. As it took a long time to finish writing this, it's now 2 months since the single came out, and I still hear it on local radio stations. So We Are Between has some staying power. The single never made it onto Billboard charts, and the album itself only charted for a week, but that's way more than they've got for a while. And for what it's worth, We Are Between did chart on various rock and alternative rock charts, but those are no Hot 100. Now, the video for We Are Between. It's weird and depressing. That's not exactly groundbreaking either for Modest Mouse videos. That describes most of them. In this one, there's a lot of very troubled-looking people in parked cars singing. But the cars are in a scrapyard, and what they are going to go between is a metal compactor. Are all these people looking to die, or is this a visualization of the crushing weight of society on people? Whatever the intended meaning, it's very visually striking, at least. The full album. Overall thoughts. This album is okay. After the disappointment of Strangers to Ourselves, I'm quite happy with it. It's not breaking significant new ground, nor is there a sense of an overarching narrative I've got from some other albums, but this album seems to me to be about hope and hopelessness. It's about climbing out of despair, but not about finding happiness directly. I definitely read this album as an ongoing struggle with mental health. The songs span a range of emotions from depressed to annoyed, but rarely upbeat or happy. And at the end, you end with contentment, I guess. You just being here, being used enough for me. These are the places that we're lucky just to be between. Through the story, there's a lot of negative emotions that are brought to the fore and purged. Like a lot of Modest Mouse songs, you could also add some interpretations about death. Everybody's talking about death. If you read this page, then that'll be your death. I can't make it to your wedding, but I'm sure I'm gonna be at your wedding. Says, God, if I have to die, you will have to die. Here's the line the album ends on. Scratch words in the dirt to remember that we're up here right now, not forever. We'll be pulled right back down to the middle again. That's a bit of a stark reminder of mortality if you're interpreting this to be about death, and reframes what happiness the song seems to have. Maybe the whole album is actually about the singer's relationship with death, finally accepting that it's something that will come, while at various times running from death, being angry about death, or becoming lost in a cycle and so forgetting about the temporary nature of life. But as the ending track is relatively happy, maybe it just means you can be happy now while being aware you'll be depressed again in the future. And of course, on the death interpretation, the album title is about death. I wonder if there's any satin in this golden casket. But now let's go through song by song to talk more about my interpretation of it. So to run through this whole album, there's one song on it before We Are Between, and that's Fuck Your Acid Trip. There's a lot of strange guitar sounds and distortions on this track. Some of the guitars laid underneath sound like they're being played backwards or something. As for the lyrics, I see it as the singer realizing they're in a bad spot and need to leave, possibly one they have been ignoring with the aid of hallucinogenic drugs. For the rest of the album, they'll be dealing with trying to find contentment or other forms of mental escape. We Are Between. I already mentioned this as the lead single. In isolation, I'd say being is pretty easy to interpret as living, but I think in the album overall it's about being between different stages in life, being between stability and complete loss of control, being in a bad but not hopeless situation. We're lucky. This song feels like it's supposed to be the end of an album, but it's only the third track. The whole thing feels like a long coda, mostly repeating the same idea over and over. The horn section reminds me of a lot of Good News or the end of Spitting Venom, in a good way. Spitting Venom is my favorite Modest Mouse song, and I'm also just a huge sucker for trumpets on rock songs. Give me those horns. Walking and Running. This song's lyrics sound joyful, but the instrumentation and delivery couldn't be farther from that. It sounds like the singer is forcing themselves to exercise and is running aggressively to drive out or escape from thoughts they don't want. Wooden Soldiers. This song quickly soured on me. I liked it the first time through, but now I think it's too long and doesn't do anything interesting. Isaac's half-chanted lyrics have been much more effective in other songs that had more musically to back them up. Thematically, it fits the overall album, contentment with the present presented in a marching beat. I already compared one song to Spitting Venom's coda, might as well do it again. If I liked this song, it would be much the same effect. The repetition would be comfortable to listen to and it would draw the song out longer because I don't want it to end. But like several songs in this album, this just has the ending repetition without any of the setup that makes a long extended ending work. They just start right out with the droning repetition. Which again, that seems thematically intentional, but it doesn't make me like the individual track anymore. Transmitting, Receiving. This continues the same driving beat of Wooden Soldiers, but with a lot more drone and psychedelic noise elements. I think saying drone psychedelic noise elements probably just made some people cringe by combining all these terms without a clear understanding of their exact definition. But what I'm trying to get across is this song is a lot denser than the previous one. And because of that, it gets more interesting each listen instead of less. This song is emphatically about its own repetition. We are repeating, we are transmitting, we are receiving. Walking and Running, Wooden Soldiers, and this song are all about becoming lost, focusing on something else instead of problems. The Sun Hasn't Left. This was the second single. Is it the highlight track of the album, or did it just seem marketable? This is one of the weirder combinations on the album, starting with basically chiptune and exploding into a robust horn section. I like the horns, I do not like the chiptune. While other songs have some electronic blips and backing lines, and there's some just straight-up chiptune songs I've liked, here the beepy intro just sounds cheap and tinny when it's isolated all by itself. I don't know if this would have been better on piano or plucked strings. I think it's just a weak musical idea to start and end the song on. Contrasting that, might just be my favorite moment of the whole album, but this song overall is just all over the place. Lace Your Shoes. Thematically, I read this song as trying to overcome the present by looking ahead to something in the future. Specifically, you want to see your child grow up and accomplish things, so you will stick around. From just the lyrics, this is the most emotionally vulnerable and depressing song on the album. But I can't help but think of the Little Motel music video and read looking forwards to the future as maybe something the parent does not have full control over. They or their child may have a very uncertain future and don't want to think of potential negative possibilities. But despite all that, I don't like this song. It's the weakest on the album. I think my interpretation is giving it far too much credit when lyrically it's much more about the singer wishing their children lived out in nature than in the city. And that's directly stated in the verses. And I'm not actually sure what this song was going for, but it didn't land. Never Fuck a Spider on the Fly. This title really makes me think of the Rolling Stones song, The Spider and the Fly. Title aside, as for the song itself, it has some paranoia in its lyrics, and is shouted with distortion and persistent background buzz, creating a difficult-to-pierce soundscape. But is it good? I don't know. While I think Lace Your Shoes missed the mark, I think I just do not get this song. Even after listening to the album many times, I really don't know what to make of this one. Leave a Light On. We're leaving, we're leaving, we're leaving, we'll be home soon. The singer is leaving a bad situation, finally, and is somewhat upbeat about it, reflecting on the weird places they've been and leaving a light on to invite the listener to come with them and leave their situation. Japanese Trees. Well, I'll take strange metaphors for 200. I'm not really sure what to make of the line, twisting in your bed like a Japanese tree. Could be writhing in pain, frustration, sexual ecstasy, or just sleeping in a weird position. Given the album theme, however, I'm going with the feeling that your growth is being stunted like a bonsai tree by the current situation you're in. Lyrically, this seems to be a return to the original theme of leaving somewhere, like Fuck Your Acid Trip and Leave a Light On, directly before it. In this case, instead of going home, the singer wants to go anywhere but where they are right now. And compared to the optimism of Leave a Light On, this seems the most desperate of all the songs. When can we leave? We have a knack of turning days into weeks, and the singer absolutely does not want to wait around. Why can't we leave? Back to the Middle. So we thematically end back here where we started, Between. And it's the happiest song on the album. It's good to be back to normal compared to the rest. Now that I've gone over the whole thing, how do I rate this album? As I don't have any other music reviews, I have no real frame of reference to give you. I'd say this is a 4 out of 5 stars. For comparison, I would rate The Moon in Antarctica and Good News as 5-star albums, and We Were Dead as 4.5 stars. Yeah, I know, why do it out of 5 if I'm doing half stars? A 5-point scale just feels better for me for music. Do I recommend this album? You can listen to it for no additional cost from your favorite music streaming service, and probably have already heard some Modest Mouse if you've got this video recommended to you. You don't have to buy albums anymore. You can listen to everything that sounds interesting, and then maybe you'll buy it later. Since I like physical media, I will buy this album if I see it physically in a store, but I'm not going to buy it as a digital download. Now, I could have ended this video with a redemption arc, where I went to a Modest Mouse concert and said how much more I liked it this time around. But I'd already heard this album when I talked about how much I didn't like them live before. Unfortunately, I don't change opinions that quickly. I already loved the band before the first show I went to, and they haven't gotten even better in my opinion since then. And they're even less likely to play Spitting Venom this time around. There's also the current spread of something that's so bad it's named after a terrible airline. It leaves me less than eager to go out to shows. I will instead close this review with my favorite Modest Mouse songs. 1. Spitting Venom. I already stated this opinion. It's an extremely good track. 2. Float On. 3. The World at Large. 4. Ocean Breathe Salty. Yes, the opening tracks of Good News for people who love bad news are all just very strong. 5. Novocaine Stain. It's a deep-cut sandwich with a commercial pop filling in the middle. Novocaine Stain's not really a top 5 type of song, except that it has my favorite lyrics of Modest Mouse's whole discography. Suburban developments are soulless hellscapes that take decades to gain a sense of character, if they ever do. One thing I can praise Strangers to Ourselves about is its cover. I've never considered whether it's Photoshop because it's completely believable to me that it's a photo of a real subdivision somewhere. And while I'm contradicting earlier points, I also really like the live version of Novocaine Stain off of Interstate 8. Also, a couple honorable mentions to Satellite Skin, which would kick Ocean Breathe Salty off if not for the strength of all 3 Good News songs together, and the instrumental version of Custom Concern. Not because it's a particularly good song, but just because how nice and happy it is compared to everything else Modest Mouse puts out is funny. So nothing on that top 5 list is from the Golden Casket. There may be eventually, but to be on there now, something would have had to really blow me away. I've had a decade to digest most of the songs compared to 2 months for the Golden Casket. And the 2 months is mostly because I'm slow at writing. So that's my review of Modest Mouse's The Golden Casket, as well as the band in general. It's better than a golden raspberry.